The lamp had burned down to almost nothing by the time I understood that the night was not going to end. Outside the window the sky was still black, but I could already hear the first rooster shifting in the coop, restless, the way they get before dawn. My prayer cap was on the floor where it had fallen hours earlier. My husband was awake beside me, and I remember one single thought moving through my exhausted mind, clear and cold. The sun is coming up, and he is not finished. Before I tell you what that night was, and what it taught me about what Amish husbands believe they are owed, I want you to know who is speaking to you. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in a small church district in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left several years ago. And this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things I was raised to carry in silence to my grave. If you want the truth about plain life from someone who actually lived it, not the postcard version, not the tourist buggy ride, subscribe and tap the like button. And in the comments, tell me one thing. Before today, did you believe an Amish wife could say no? I read every single comment, and I promise you, the answers will surprise you. I was 18 when I married Amos. In the English world, that sounds young. In my world, it was almost late. Most girls in my district were promised by 17. School had ended for me at the close of 8th grade, the way it ends for all of us. After that, my education was the kitchen, the garden, the younger children, the sewing. By 16, I was going to the Sunday evening singings, and that is where the quiet machinery of courtship begins. A boy gives you a buggy ride home. He starts visiting on Sunday nights. And within a season, the whole church district assumes you are as good as married. But here is what people outside the community do not understand. Nobody ever explained to me what marriage would actually require of my body. Not my mother, not my older sisters, not one married woman in that entire district. We were taught to cook for 100 people, to can vegetables for a winter, to deliver a calf in the freezing dark. And we were taught nothing, absolutely nothing, about the night that was waiting for us at the end of the wedding day. What we were taught instead was a word. Gehorsam, obedience. A wife obeys her husband. That was the whole instruction, that was the entire preparation. And folded inside that one word was a meaning that nobody ever said out loud, because saying it out loud would have been immodest. And immodesty was a sin worse than almost anything else. Let me explain the theology, because it took me years and a great deal of therapy to understand the shape of the thing I had lived inside. In my church district, marriage rested on the idea of headship. The husband is the head of the wife, the way the bishop is the head of the congregation. His authority is not something he earns. It is given to him the moment the vows are spoken. And the wife's part, her holy part, is to yield. Not sometimes. Not when she feels ready. The teaching made no room for the word ready. A wife who yields is faithful. A wife who hesitates is proud. And pride, hochmut, is the deepest sin we knew. So when the bishop preached at my wedding about the wife submitting to the husband as the church submits to God, every woman on those hard benches nodded. And not one of them looked at me to warn me what that submission would mean once the door upstairs was closed. My wedding was on a Thursday in late November, after the harvest, the way they always are. I woke at 4 a.m. to begin cooking. By noon, nearly 250 people filled my parents' house and the cleared-out barn. The ceremony went on for almost 4 hours. There was the preaching, the singing from the Ausbund, slow and wordless and ancient, the vows before the bishop. And then the feast. Roast chicken and stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy so thick the spoon stood up in it, choufle pie that stuck sweet to the back of my teeth. People laughed and lingered. My face ached from smiling at every aunt and cousin and neighbor. And underneath the smiling, all day, one fear sat in my stomach like a stone. I could feed 250 people. I had no idea what would be asked of me when they all went home. The guests left late. The house finally went quiet. And Amos and I climbed the narrow stairs to the room that was now ours. A simple room, a wooden bed his own father had helped him build. A quilt my aunts had stitched square by square. a wash basin with cool water, no mirror on the wall, and no lock on the door because in an Amish house, a locked door is itself a kind of accusation. I want to be honest with you about Amos, because this story is not as simple as a cruel man and a frightened girl. Amos was not cruel. He was 21. He could plow a field straight as a ruled line and shoe a horse in the pitch dark. And he had been taught, every single day of his life, exactly as I had been taught. Only the lesson he received was the mirror of mine. I was taught that a wife yields. He was taught that a husband leads, and that a wife who is truly faithful will never, ever refuse him. He had been handed a belief about what was his by right, and he had no more idea than I did that the belief itself could be a kind of harm. That night, he believed something was owed to him, and in the world that raised us both, he was not wrong. That was the terrible part. By every rule we had ever been given, he was not wrong. I will not give you the details that this platform would not allow me to give, but I will tell you the shape of it. I had thought, in my deepest innocence, that the wedding night was one thing, a single crossing of a single line, and then sleep. Nobody had told me otherwise, because nobody told me anything. And so when the first time ended, and I lay there thinking it was finished, thinking I had done my duty and could finally rest my aching body, and then I understood that, in his mind, it was not finished, that the night belonged to him, and he intended to claim all of it, something in me went very quiet and very far away. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here, not on this platform, not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So I wrote the rest down instead, slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. 208 pages of what plain life looks like from the inside of it. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. I watched the window the whole night. I learned the exact color the sky turns at 3 in the morning, and then at 4, that deep blue that is not yet light, but is no longer fully dark. I heard the horses shift in the barn below us. I heard the clock my grandmother had given us tick on the wall. And I waited for the sun because I had decided, somewhere in my exhausted mind, that when the sun came up, surely it would be over. Surely the day would call him to the barn. The cows would need milking whether a man was married yesterday or not. And that, in the end, was the only mercy. Not a word from him that I was tired. Not a question about whether I was all right. The cows, the animals did not care about anyone's wedding. When the rooster finally crowed for real, Amos rose, pulled on his trousers and his suspenders, and went down to the barn as though the night had been an ordinary night. And I lay alone in that bed, as the gray light filled the room, and I did not cry. I was too tired to cry. I just stared at the ceiling, and felt that a girl had gone into that room the evening before, and someone else entirely was lying in the bed now. And here is what nobody tells you. That morning I got up too. I washed my face in the cold basin. I pinned my prayer cap back over my hair. I tied on my apron, and I went down to the kitchen, and I started the stove, and I cooked breakfast for the man who had kept me awake until sunrise. Because there were guests still in the house finishing their leftover roast. And not one of them asked me how the night had been. Not one of them ever would. In my world, that question did not exist. The silence around it was total, and the silence was the point. I carried that night quietly for a long time. I told myself it was simply what marriage was. I told myself that my exhaustion was my own weakness, my own pride, my own failure to yield with a glad heart. Because that is what the teaching does. It does not only control what happens to you, it reaches inside and controls how you are permitted to feel about what happens to you. If you suffer, the suffering is your fault for not being faithful enough. The system is sealed. There is no crack in it through which a complaint could ever escape. My friend Rebecca married a year before I did. Years later, the two of us were shelling peas on her back porch, our hands busy so our eyes would not have to meet, and she said something so quietly I almost missed it. She said that for the first 2 years of her marriage, she believed there was something broken in her, because she dreaded the nights, and she thought a good wife was supposed to feel only gratitude. She had never once said those words to another living soul. And I sat there with my hands full of peas, and realized that every married woman I had ever known might be carrying the very same stone in her stomach, and every single one of us thought we were the only one. That is the genius of the thing, and I use that word with all the bitterness it deserves. The control did not need a lock on the door. It did not need a fence or a guard. It only needed silence, passed down from mother to daughter as carefully as a recipe, the silence itself doing the work that no chain ever could. When I finally left, at 23, the cost came all at once, the shunning, the Meidung. My letters returned unopened. My mother's voice gone from the telephone. My father's door shut to me as though I had died, and in their eyes, in the only world they knew, I had. It was a counselor in the English world who first handed me the words I had never been allowed to hold: consent, autonomy. She asked me once to describe those early days of my marriage, and I did, carefully, in this new vocabulary that still felt strange in my mouth. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, the fact that he believed he was owed something does not mean that you owed it. Belief is not a debt. And I had to set down my coffee because my hands had started to shake, because in 23 years no one had ever told me that the thing I had been raised to call holy obedience had another name entirely. She told me something else, too, that I think about almost every day. She said that the cruelest cage is the one where they convince you that you built it yourself, out of your own sin, and that staying inside it is the only way to be good. I do not tell you this to make you hate the people who raised me. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and it would be false. The Amish world gave me real things. A community that shows up for every barn raising and every funeral without being asked. A work ethic that has carried me through every hard year since I left. A faith that I have wrestled with and wounded, and slowly, on my own terms, rebuilt. Amos himself was not a monster. He was a frightened boy who had been handed a belief about ownership and never told it could be questioned. We were 2 children, dressed as adults, performing a marriage that neither of us had been given the tools to understand. But there is no theology that makes a woman's exhaustion holy. There is no scripture that turns a sleepless, frightened night into an act of God. There is no verse that says a wife's body stops being her own the moment a bishop speaks over it. They told me that obedience was love. It was not love. It was a man taking what he had been promised was his, and a girl too unprepared and too afraid to know she was allowed to say the word that lived in her throat all night. The word stop. If you grew up in a place where your silence was called faithfulness, I see you. If you ever lay awake in the dark beside someone and did not know that you were allowed to refuse, that your tiredness counted, that your body was still yours even after the vows, I see you too. You were not weak. You were not proud. You were a person who had been handed a duty and denied the one piece of knowledge that would have set you free. And if no one in your life has ever said these words to you, then let me be the one to say them now. Your body belongs to you. It always did, even on the night they told you it did not. If you want to read the version of this story that YouTube will not allow, the full pages are in the Ordnung they never wrote down. First comment of this video. And that is everything. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.